Amen. If you turn to your notes, the firm foundation of our faith, I just want to finish off a few loose ends. Does anybody have any comments from yesterday's study? That's Jim.
Good question. And you can make this extremely brief because I haven't been here, so I'm behind. But I was trying to understand what you illustrated there with the blocks, and then off to the right, where you were describing. You were doing an application to what we read about Sister White, how she was given an understanding versus the methodology. And what caught my eye was on the right side where you had a vertical display right underneath the original horizontal line. And that, along with the blocks, you're saying that the new understanding doesn't contradict the original understanding?
Yes.
And if you can do this briefly, how is it the end result different?
So perhaps this serves as a good example. So I don't know if everybody understands what this is trying to portray. If you go to Testimonies of the Church, Volume 9, beginning at page 11 and onwards, it's quite a lengthy section. It talks about Ellen White having been in New York, having this dream, and how she sees these buildings in New York being taken down. And the passage that we often go to is on page 13. And we say, here's proof that 9/11 was encoded in the spirit of prophecy. And we've used that argument for quite a while. It's not the only place that we go to. We also go to another article, which is often referenced as Life Sketches 411. But it's from an original Review and Herald article, which I believe is 1906. And that's what Brother Daniel mentioned yesterday in his sermon, when he had a date 1906. He took from 1 Chronicles chapter 15, I think. So we've taken passages like that as an example, or we've gone to places that talk, for instance, about the latter rain, and we've taken those passages and brought them into a time period that's earlier than Ellen White would speak about. Give another example, Great Controversy chapter 38, the book that you've been studying at church. Chapter 38, and I think chapter 39, but chapter 38 is the one that I'm thinking of here. She references Revelation 18 verses 1, 2 and 4. I think we're all familiar with that. I think I've also discussed it in class. And if you check the title, it's called The Final Warning. And if you ask any Adventist what the final warning is, because Adventists have this idea that we're the remnant church, so we are therefore okay. We are identified in Revelation 12 verse 17. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus, and the dragon goes to make war against us. We self-identify as being that group of people, and we're going to give a message to the world, first, second and third angel's message. We are that angel. So when we think about the final warning, we know that it's this final warning here in the Sunday law history. And if you just even a cursory reading of chapter 38 in the Great Controversy, that's what Ellen White is discussing. She's not discussing a history that is before that. So if you were to ask people in our movement, go to chapter 38 of the Great Controversy, and she speaks about Revelation 18, 1, 2, and 4. What is she talking about? That's the question that we want to address, because we have argued that here at 9/11, the angel of Revelation 18, verses 1 to 3, came down. And why do we say that? We say that based upon passages such as this 90 passage, but particularly the one in Life Sketches 4:11, which is a Review and Herald article. I can't remember the month, but it's 1906. Does that make sense? So we've taken passages that talk about when the Lord shall shake terribly the earth, these buildings in New York are going to be taken down. And we know that buildings were taken down or brought down at 9/11. So we're going to place these passages here at 9/11, which clearly talk about Revelation 18, 1 to 3. I'm going to argue that those passages that we use here are obscure Spirit of Prophecy quotes. They're not mainstream quotes. And to me, mainstream is, her major works, like the Conflict of the Ages series, Christ Object Lessons, Steps to Christ, the major publications which were designed to be given for public consumption. Because she wrote a lot, and a lot of that was, like internal magazines, things like that. So if you go to the Great Controversy, she's going to speak about Revelation 18, and she's going to put it in a chapter, in a certain framework. And if you go and see how she's doing that, I'm arguing that this is the Sunday law that she's identifying. So this is a similar argument to the one that we've got here, but this one isn't really talking about Revelation 18. So if I come back to this one for a second, if you go to page 13 and you run through this narrative, in fact, if you go all the way back to page 11, and I think it's around page 29 or something, in the 20s, I'm saying that the whole story is about the development, about the warfare between God's church and Satan's kingdom, and the context of page 13 is as you come to the close of probation. And there's this odd paragraph. I'm not saying it is odd in the original, but we make it odd because it talks about buildings coming down in New York. And we tie this one with this passage, and she's going to connect Revelation 18, 1 to 3 there. So what we do is, we say, this is 9/11, therefore proof texting, this must be 9/11. And to do that, we'd have to go back into this passage and say, well, how does that work? Because close of probation, 9/11, close of probation. So it'd be like, let's talk about this, then jump back to this, then go back to this. So we've got two simple conclusions to come to. Either this is a flashback, but he knows what a flashback is, yeah? Or she's not talking about 9/11. She's talking about something that's going to happen in this history. And people are going to say, and people are already saying, yep, this proves that our whole message doesn't work. So, holding that thought, we'll come back to this one, Great Controversy, chapter 38. When she quotes verses 1, 2, and 4, question we have to ask ourselves, what is her framework? What is she talking about? Where would we place this? Because she doesn't say it's Sunday law. I'm saying it's Sunday law when you read contextually, because she's talking about the final warning. So either she's taking this verse and stretching it back to 9/11 without telling you, so we've constructed that logic, or it really is at the Sunday law, and we have to rethink how we're going to use Revelation 18, verses 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm of the opinion that it's the latter, that she's talking about the Sunday law, and therefore we have to come up with an explanation of how this is working. So coming back to your question, hopefully I'm going to try and answer it, is I'm not saying that Revelation 18, 1-3 at 9/11 is wrong. What I'm saying is that if you go back and check the primary source references, which will be Great Controversy, this Review and Herald article, and Testimonies of the Church Volume 9, we now have to explain how we came to this understanding in a different way, using a methodology that I think is coherent and consistent. And I'm suggesting just to say that we'll get this one and we'll just extend it back to 9/11 because it fits, or because we saw some things with fire engines at 9/11, it fits, or because the buildings in New York were taken down and it was a work by Radical Islam. Radical Islam is a power that's brought to view in the Millerite history in 1840, so we parallel histories there. All of those arguments work, but I think we need a more nuanced, a more sophisticated argument, which I'm calling methodology, to explain what we have done in the past. So it's not to undo the veracity of this, but it's to explain it in a more systematic fashion. That's what I'm trying to demonstrate. And it wasn't my intent to answer this question about 9/11 yesterday, but this is what I've been trying to do for the last X months, last year, maybe even last 2 years, is for us to be more focused in our Bible study. And it's not so much to take things for granted, because I'm not searching for these things. They just come in front of me and in front of us, these questions. And they're the same questions that people who have left this movement are asking. You will have noticed that we've essentially stopped fighting or arguing with the church. Most of the attacks that we received were based upon the 2520 from the church, the conference structure, and that's pretty much stopped. We've gone sort of through a lull. And what now are the arguments, depending on who our opponents are, they're all people who came from this movement, and they're either attacking our concept of the harvest, that is a huge area of contention, or it's the second angel. If we put the second angel here, or at the Sun Lord, but it's this one here at 9/11. So it's the second angel that's being attacked, the concept of how we understand it as a movement. The harvest is being attacked, which I call the binding off. It's a term that we're more familiar with. And then people go and look at Matthew 25, that it doesn't fulfill to the very letter. So people are now going back and saying, our understanding of these passages, whether they're biblical ones or Spirit of Prophecy quotes, is wrong. And they can demonstrate that they're wrong because they say we're misapplying things. And I'm not trying to say, no, we got it all correct to begin with, that everything was right. I'm saying let us take an honest and frank look at those passages, those Bible passages, all those Spirit of Prophecy quotes, to try and understand them, to try and understand what we did and how we came to our conclusions. And the more I look, the more I see is the truths that we had were correct. You can demonstrate this, I believe, but not in the way that we thought that we could. I don't think you can simply go to these passages, the Life Sketches one, the 9T one, or drag the Great Controversy, chapter 38, and bring it back here. I don't think you can do that in good conscience once you start exploring it. So that's what I'm trying to show, is how we got from here to here. And 9/11 is a good example, because 9/11 was discovered in this history. We weren't predicting 9/11 before it happened. When it came, people began to study. They came across this passage. They came across the Life Sketches passage. They watched video footage that the fire engines were basically ineffective. They weren't able to do their work. And they just put two and two together and said, therefore, 9/11 was a fulfillment of prophecy. The angel of Revelation 18 came down, and this, we all know the story. And so today, obviously not today after literally today, but today generally, if I were to ask a class like this, where would you place Revelation 18? Where do you put the latter rain? Questions like that. People would, or the judgment of the living, people will gravitate to 9/11. And the gravitation to 9/11 is based upon this logic that I've just said. We just saw history being fulfilled. We saw Spirit prophecy quotes, and then we said it must be 9/11. But now when we re-look, hopefully more objectively, we see that we're coming up with different answers, and it disturbs people. The people I'm talking about is ourselves. So I'm saying judgment of the living is Sunday law, not 9/11. I'm saying the latter rain is the Sunday law, not 9/11. I'm saying Revelation 18 is here at the Sunday law, and so we have to explain how we're going to go back to 9/11. That's what I'm trying to demonstrate, why we are where we are today compared to where we were only a few years ago. Hopefully that sounds relatively simple and straightforward, and it is. The answer to those problems is a bit more complex, because we have to take into consideration fractals, priests, Levites and Nethinims, which I still think we haven't got quite right. In everybody's thinking, we're still struggling with that, which is why I wanted to go to this line. And I'm saying if we just keep on coming back to this line and get really focused in our minds, when we come to the line of the priests, it becomes a much more straightforward task of understanding what's going on. So that's part of my defense or my argument. It doesn't fully answer this, how we go about doing this work of getting the second angel or Revelation 18 back to here. I'll give one more example of this, the difficulty that we face. Go to Revelation 14. We've got the first, second and third angel's message, 3 angels. Then we go to Revelation 18 and we say, look, there's a 4th angel. So we end up calling it number 4. And we know that Ellen White never calls it the 4th angel. She calls it this other angel. When she does that, she obscures the truth that verse 4 here is, if you're going to talk about it in numbers, it would be a 5th angel. It's not even the 4th angel. They're 2 separate angels. Ellen White even tells us that's not guesswork. And it's not even a singular angel, it's a group of angels. So you've got 5 angels. But the problem is, when you start calling it a 4th angel, I'm saying it starts shifting your thinking in a direction that causes you problems. Which is why I want us to see that it's not a 4th angel, it's the 2nd angel. Ellen White will tell us that the 2nd angel's message was first given in Millerite history, and then she says it repeats in our history. Then if we're familiar with that passage, so she's going to say Millerite history and our history. She's going to say the 2nd angel, and then the 2nd angel repeats. All I'm trying to explain, just with respect to this, is when that 2nd angel came down, it never left the earth. It's been here all this while, flying around, warning about Babylon and its fall. And this angel has been going all the way through history. It never stopped speaking. But here, at the end of the world, it's going to change its language. Here it's saying Babylon has begun to fall, and here it's saying Babylon has completely fallen. It's now a much larger problem than it was here. If we want to do it in a really simple fashion, this was the USA, and this is the world. Because it says it's the cage of every hateful bird. It's grown in its scope. First it was just the Protestant churches, now it's a much bigger problem, much bigger entity. So it's little things like that when we talk about a 4th angel, like it's some other angel doing some other work, we end up thinking about the problem in a way that I think leads us down a wrong path. So if I just develop that thought, what we then did would say, look, we've got verses 1, 2 and 3. So maybe that's the first, second and third angel's messages. We just like doing 1, 2, 3. We want to find the first, second and third angel's messages at the end of the world. It looked tidy, it looked neat. And it says Babylon is fallen in verse 2, not in verse 1 or verse 3. So it kind of fitted. But just a plain reading of the verse doesn't allow you to do that. Verse 1 says an angel came down, and verse 2 says he cried. So the pronoun here in verse 2 is connected to the noun in verse 1. They're the same person. And we kind of just did what the Millerites did, just ignored plain English, really. And we said, oh, we'll just make it 1, 2 and 3. And we get away with doing that. All of us said, yeah, that sounds fine. I'm sure if you go to all the speakers, if you went back for a few years, we all said that. And I'm saying, how did we get away with doing that? It's amazing. It's amazing that you let us get away with that. And I'm saying that was all about this history. Now I'm saying, just look, it's not even reading carefully. Just the simple reading of it tells you it's the same person all the way through. And it's the second angel. And I'm saying that this second angel has been here all the time. It just tells you the two phases of its work. If I could do it this way, this would be the arrival, and this would be the empowerment. The arrival and the empowerment. As soon as you start thinking about it that way, this 2E then comes to the Sunday law. It's not 9/11. This would be the Sunday law history. And what I'm trying to do is to use Ellen White's writings as they're written to try and develop these frameworks, which is what we're required to do, which is what we do in this movement. And when I say I don't want to massage it, the data, I'm not trying to infer that other people want to massage it. This is not an accusation against anybody. This is how I'm understanding it. I'm saying I massage the data because you can find a presentation that I would have done something like that a few years ago. I'm saying I just don't accept that anymore. Plain reading the word doesn't teach you that. It's not a fourth angel, it's the second. And if we just stuck with what we were given, we can come up with those right answers. So I'm not sure if you've seen me do this. I'm going to redraw what I just did. Millerite history, our history. So she's going to have a 2A and a 2E. And she's going to connect it this way. This is a large scale. She's also going to give a 2E here. This 2E here is July, August. Millerite history. But connected to that 2E is a 2A. One of the most useful books to do all of this detective work in is Early Writings or Spiritual Gifts Volume 4. She gives us a lot of help to understand this. What I want us to see is that there's this repeating pattern, which in the phrase we use now, the word we use is fractals. You can see it at this small scale, you can see it at this large scale. And she's going to give you all of this information. What she doesn't tell you is where 2A comes in the Millerite line. She doesn't say that explicitly. She'll say things like in the summer of 1844, the second angel spoke, or was first preached, or was first given. And that's this 2E, that's July, August. She's going to give us some clues about 2A, so we have to do a bit of detective work. And we read a passage, I think the other day, that helped us to show that. I can't remember the context of that, but we did bring that up in class. I'm saying this 2A is April 19th. When I say I'm saying that, I don't think anybody in this class would disagree with that. But you can't prove it. That's all I'm saying. That's my only point. All you can prove is that it's after the disappointment. So this one here I'll put a star by it. This one is detective work. This one and this one, she gives us this. This is just a generic statement that the second came in Millerite history and it's going to carry on in our history. She gives us this one, 2e. This one, she tells us it's coming, or it's there in that history, but we have to do a bit of detective work. We know it comes after April. It doesn't happen before. So, based upon these two testimonies, we're going to go to our history. And our history, I'm saying upon the testimony of two, a thing is established, so we should expect the same pattern here for us. The 2e and the 2a. Now, when we approach this problem in our history, we didn't do it like this. We just went to these quotes here, and we said Revelation 18, 9/11, those towers came down, and we just said the second angel's message just came down here at 9/11. We go to great controversy and we read that, we say, yeah, that's not a problem. She's just taking us back to 9/11. In one paragraph, she goes from 9/11 all the way to the Sunday law, and now begins the Sunday law story, the final warning. Or we might argue the final warning first begins with the church and then goes to the world. But the great controversy won't let you do that. That's my argument. If you hold on to that one thought, I'm just going to step out and make another connected thought. Most of inspiration, almost exclusively, is going to talk to humanity in a certain framework. And that framework is this, that God has a servant, a prophet, a people, his church, us. And there's nothing wrong with that church. It's in full compliance with God's will. They're good. And that body of people, or that individual, is now going to do a work for a lost group, a lost world. Gentiles, if you like. And most of inspiration is framed in that context, that you've got God's people who are good, who are going to do a work for people who are lost. And it doesn't show you that God's people are not good, that God's people are in a mess. You have to dig that story out, and it's there to be seen, but it's sort of under the surface. Revelation 14, those angels, they're not bad people, they're good people who are fully in compliance with God's will. And what are they doing? If you read all the story about those three angels, they're giving a message to the world. Then we come up, like John the Baptist, and we say, hold on, before you can go to the world, we just want to tell you that the church is sick and derelict from the head to the soul. And before we can go and do something to the world, we need to get our own house in order. That story is not very well portrayed in Scripture. We have to dig that out. So what I'm saying is this, a book like The Great Controversy, when it talks about chapter 38, it's talking about a church that's all clean and purified and all good, giving a message, which is the final warning to the world. It's the church giving a message to the world. And that's why it's going to be at the Sunday law. And I think most people would think that's reasonable. The structured Adventist church comes to a conclusion to say that this church is good. And they base that upon their reading of inspiration, because it always says that we're good, that all we need to do is give a message to the world. And we come and say, hold on, there's another story, a story that we're ignoring. What about Laodicea? What about John the Baptist? What about Jesus saying your house is left unto you desolate? What about those stories? We accuse the church, Adventism, to say we are blind and ignoring obvious things. So our focus is on giving a message to the church. And we too, I think, have been blindsided by that. We're so focused upon giving a message to the church, we forget, actually, hold on, most of inspiration is structured in a different way. So what we're going to do is we're going to read inspiration and we're going to try and make it fit to a story that's between us, this movement, and the conference church. And we can do that, but we need to be careful how we do that. So what we should not be doing is taking a Spirit of Prophecy quote that says this and dragging it back and saying that was what the original intention was. We might say we can make an application, but we never spoke about it in that fashion. We just said the original intent is 9/11 of chapter 38, and it never was. So coming back to this story, when we spoke about the second angel, this was Revelation 14, this is Revelation 18. Ellen White even speaks about it in that term. This is 14, and this is 18. Now when you come to Revelation 18, it's only one verse, or one group of verses, 1 to 3, so you're not going to be able to apply that twice. So we just had one application of that, and when does that angel come down? If you go to all these passages, you go to the newspapers, they'll tell you it happened at 9/11. So we said it's 9/11. Then someone says, what about great controversy? How are you going to deal with that? We say, it's not a problem. It just began at 9/11, and it goes all the way through. Or, this one, you say, well, just a flashback. I'm saying I don't think you can do that. What we need to see is another story. And we can explain that. I'm saying Ellen White, I'll put SOP, is talking about this event here, which is the Sunday law, which is the final events. And when you structure it this way, all of these quotes from Life Sketches, the Review and Herald, Great Controversy, 90, all are explainable that way. Then what we're saying is, well, okay, that's all good. Well, what about this one? And the question is, what about that one? Because Adventists don't even know this one exists. And the reason they don't know that exists is because they don't use lines or structures or patterns. They're not, I'll say it in another way, they're not digging for hid treasure because they don't know even that the treasure's there. So if we were going to go back, and if I can say it this way, if we were going to go back and do our work properly, which means use methodology, use the rules, we would have done it this way. We would have said, Ellen White says, Millerite history and our history, second angel comes twice. Go back into the Millerite history, you go to the summer and the spring, it's twice. You come to our history, even though we've only got one Bible passage, which is Revelation 18, remember they've only got Revelation 14, but it comes twice. In our history, we know this because Ellen White teaches us this, we should be looking for this. How and when does this happen? And if we were looking what's happening in the world, what's happening in our church, we would have said, you know what, that looks like 9/11. And that's how we should have approached the problem. But if we had approached it that way, first of all, no one would have believed us. We would have had to have done years and years, like 29 years of research to be able to work all of that out, and we wouldn't be able to kickstart this movement. It would just never have happened if we had done it that way. So I'm saying in God's providence, He knows our human weakness. He says, okay, what we'll do is we're going to just use this kind of technique, read a passage and say, that looks like 9/11, that looks like 9/11, therefore it is 9/11, and all of us got sucked into that. We all bought into it. And now people are questioning that, saying, that was just all wrong. And we're saying, no, that was an application. Now, people don't like me using that argument because it sounds like self-justification. But I'm not saying, I don't believe it's a weak argument. I think it's a very strong argument based upon this idea of fractals, which is why people who have left this movement have to walk away from fractals. They can't accept them because this is one of our defense. And they say the word of fractals is a new age term. So just change the word if you don't like the word fractal. But this technique is clearly portrayed in the scriptures. You can call it alpha and omega if you want. There's many ways of using that phrase, and we shouldn't get caught up in fractals. I'm not trying to walk away from the term. I have no problems with it. Fractals are tessellations. You can show tessellations are brought to view in Esther chapter 1. It's right there in the passage. So this is an explanation that I would give today about the relationship between Revelation 18 here. It comes twice, if you like. I'll explain it a different way. Once for the church, once for the world. It's this church one that's the problem, because we don't want to accept that this church is in a mess. And you see history after history that teaches you that. If you stand up as a prophet or the mouthpiece of God and say, this church is in a mess, you're going to get into trouble. And that's what we're doing. So that's what I was trying to portray, and that's a little bit about the methodology of what I'm saying today, an explanation of how we justify, or how I'm justifying, the use of 9/11 and bringing Angel of Revelation 18 down. It's not trying to stretch quotes, it's trying to understand that this concept of first the church and then the world is, if applied correctly, explains a lot. Sister Brittany?
But we already say that the second angel arrived on 9/11.
Sorry?
We already say that the second angel arrived at 9/11.
Based upon what? That's my point. Based upon a reading of these passages. And I'm saying, if you going to read those passages, you might be hard pushed to actually prove contextually that that's what's being brought to view there.
I was about to ask before, probably now I think you have explained, because we still put 9/11 on our line, you know, but we seem to shift everything that we used to say happened 9/11 to the Sunday law, and my question was, why do we still put it on the line? And I think now I get it, because we make an application, right? Or why?
Yeah, it's an application, but what we've got to remember is this line is based upon an agricultural model, and from Sunday law to the end, this is spirit of prophecy. This is not this movement's understanding. All we've done is created these two waymarks, which is I put them in blue, and if you are to accept that, and I think we have the license not to accept the date, but to accept the concept. Because Ellen White says the judgment, investigative judgment, begins with the dead and goes to the living. And no one knows when it switches from the dead to the living. She says we don't know when that's going to happen. But we know it's going to happen. So if it's going to happen, I think we have the rights. No, we're required to say, well, what would it look like? So I've got a structure here that says this is the living people at the end. Can't be that long, 50 years, 60 years, can't be 100 years, because people would be dead. No one survives that long. So it has to be time limited, so if you're okay with that. These two are already given. She's going to talk about the latter rain extensively. If you've got the latter rain, you now have an agricultural model, which I've erased back here, but you've got the harvest, latter rain, former rain, then sowing, and then preparation. So if you do that at the end of the world, and she gives you this latter rain, the Bible gives you the harvest. It's right here, taken from Revelation 14. Jesus comes in the clouds with a sickle. So you've got the harvest built into here, you've got latter rain. So all we need to do is have the former rain, the seed sowing, and the preparation. But that has to be also for the final generation. So this waymark here, we should be able to create the waymark and then look for it in history. So that's what I'm saying. When you come to the end of the world and you know the Sunday law is about to happen, you should be looking for two waymarks. Where you start the story and the next waymark that comes after it, which would be the preparation and the former rain. What we did is we approached the problem in a totally different way. And the question is, did we make a mistake when we did that? And the more I look back into this story, the more I'm convinced that we didn't make a mistake. The reasoning may have not been logical, but there was a reasoning behind it. But this story that I've given here isn't the only logic. You know, we've also got the Millerite line, where we're going to use line upon line, and we start discussing that history and bring that into our own history. So 9/11, it gets tackled in a couple of different ways.
So you're saying that those passages on the board, using methodology, we can now go back to them and read them and say, yeah, well, I don't know about all of them, but some of them, yes, they can be applied at 9/11, but that the main intent of those passages being written was to speak to later on, not at 9/11, even though it can be applied to 9/11. Is that the difference?
Yeah, if you go to Acts chapter 2 and 3, Peter's going to make an application of Joel. He's saying, you know, what you see here is the fulfillment of Joel. But then Ellen White's going to say, no, that was a fulfillment at the end of the world. And Joel's going to say, no, it's actually fulfilled in his time. So prophets are raised up, and they take pre-existing inspiration and they say, this is going to be applied to us. The prophet spoke more about our time than their own. What people are objecting to is our right to do the same thing. They say, who gives you the right to do that? And I'm saying, who gave William Miller the right to do that? So I'm saying human beings who are the servants of God in a reform line have the authority, in fact not just the authority, they are required to make applications. And so it might sound like a weak argument. I'm saying let's just whitewash all of our mistakes, all of our false reading of inspiration, and just call it application. But I'm saying I don't think it's a whitewash. I think it's the argument. And this is the argument when you start bringing priests and prophets into this story. So, you know, it really revolves, to me, if you want to bring it down to the core argument, is who gives us the right to do what we're doing? Where do we get our authority from? Are we able to self-identify that we are God's servants here on earth? When I say we, I mean this movement. And people are going to say no, and some people are going to say yes. So if you get to the place where you say, yes, God sent me as an individual, I am someone, I self-identify in that role, then you begin to, then you're forced to take on all the baggage that comes with that. And one of them is found straight out of Isaiah 28, which is one of the key passages that we use for line upon line, verses 10 and 13. Line upon line, we're all familiar with that. But if you go back to a couple of verses before that, it talks about the priests and the prophets are no longer doing their work. And if you read the verses as from around verse 5 to 13, basically what it's speaking about is those priests and prophets are going to lose their job, and God's going to raise up new people to do that work. And they're priests and prophets. We'll call ourselves priests, and I've discussed this in class. We don't even know what a priest is. You know, we talk about priests and it's some kind of benign job function, because we pick up one of their characteristics, which is a teacher. But they have other roles as well. And we don't want to get into those other roles because we say that's blasphemous to do things like that, which I don't think it is. So when we talk about priests and prophets, I'm saying the role of a prophet becomes a problem to people. So how do prophets operate? Most of the time we think that they do some original brand new work, and I don't think they do. All they do is they go, when they come on the scene at a certain time, they go back to previous information and say, that previous information, let me tell you that that's been applied today. Give you one example. Jeremiah. He says, remember that story about Jacob? That story about Jacob, that real man, when he fought with that real angel, is being applied now. When you go into Babylon in a few years, that's Jacob's time of trouble. And people would say, that's crazy, what are you talking about? On what authority can you even do that? I mean, if I did that, people would say that's crazy. If Ellen White does that, people say that's inspiration. She's going to take a man and an angel fighting 2,500 years ago plus, and say that's talking about this history here. And we just accept that hook, line and sinker. I mean, how do we do that? Because we say she has the right to do that. And it works. So whatever argument, we're going to justify her doing that. But I'm saying we're doing the same thing. We're taking Spirit of Prophecy quotes or Bible quotes and we're applying them in different ways. And it should not be a surprise to us when people say, you don't have a right to do that. They said it about Ellen White. They said it about Paul. They said it about Jeremiah. All the prophets that come up in their own dispensation, not going to be accepted. Because a prophet is not accepted in his own house. You know, we apply that to Jesus just going to Nazareth. But it applies that his own house is his own people. He's not accepted by his own people. Therefore, we're not going to be accepted by our own people. People don't accept that we're prophets. And I've laboured extensively about the subject of prophets and how I understand what prophets mean. And people just say, this is self-exhortation. And they just throw it all away. But the people who throw our arguments away, see where they go. See what message they end up having. They end up having no message and they're going nowhere. Because there are so many things that we teach that are true. You know, people have gone away and said, we don't know what we're talking about. 9/11 was a type. You go to the binding off of the priests, and that's the true answer. That's the true fulfillment. People accept that for a while, then they realize the foolishness of it, and they walk away from that because it's just not sustainable. So, I guess I kind of preached a bit, and I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah? Okay. I don't know if I answered your question, Brother Jim. Yep.
Thank you. I don't mean to take so long.
No, it's fine.
The comment I'll make is that it sounds like our charts that we circulate probably need to be updated a little bit. And also, in a little bit broader, looser sense, it's interesting that what you've just described is this closer look refinement within what we're doing was also brought out by Sister Tess's presentation of how we look at the information we're getting from the world. We're kind of doing the same thing. We're refining and looking a little more closely at what we took at the surface level. That's it.
And I think, I'm not saying you or people literally, I think we're scared to do that because who knows what we'll find. You know, maybe we'll find this huge mistake and we'll say it was all wrong or something. I think we have to be brave enough to look at the data, and when it doesn't look good, just accept it for what it is, if we're reading it correctly, and trust in the Lord that how He's led us, that He'll give us the answers to the problems that we or the answers that we don't have. For me, because I can only, if I want to give a testimony, I'm satisfied that everything that we've taught in the past is explainable, it's understandable, and I would defend that. And I have no fears that 9/11 isn't correct, or 1989 or 1996. I hold on to all of those truths. I explain it in a different way now. And for me personally, it's taken some difficult moments to actually, to talk to you folks, to say, by the way, do you want to have a look at this? Because it's like not easy to do that for all of us to say, wow, that's interesting, because we're so worried about what will people think about us, that we were wrong. Okay, so if we're okay with that, unless anybody's got any more questions, just finish off our little paper. So we read the first 3 paragraphs. Paragraph 2 and 3 we didn't read extensively, but I wanted to focus in paragraph 3 particularly on the first sentence and the last sentence. The fact that the mind was closed. I've not discussed what the 2 or 3 years was, just the fact that it was locked. She explains the context of that in the paragraph before, which is 207 paragraph 1. Then the last sentence, 207 paragraph 2, from that time on, after the foundations were laid, I was able to understand the Word of God. And the application that I made for this is from 2014. We're now understanding the Word of God in a way that we haven't approached previous to that. Next paragraph, 207 paragraph 3. What influence is it would lead men at this stage of our history to work in an underhand, powerful way to tear down the foundation of our faith, the foundation that was laid at the beginning of our work by prayerful study of the Word and by revelation. Upon this foundation we have been building for the past 50 years. Do you wonder that when I see the beginning of a work that would remove some of the pillars of our faith, I have something to say? I must obey the command, meet it. So, if you're familiar with some of the historical things that are going on in this time period, which is against Kellogg, the phrase meet it will probably bring to your remembrance what is the meet it phrase connected to? Larry? A ship. Yeah. This is this iceberg and this ship, an allusion to the Titanic, perhaps. But she's using this phrase on, yeah, ship's going to hit the iceberg, and if it hits it head on, it would shudder a bit, but it would survive. If it tries to avoid it, it's going to have a glancing blow, it's going to sink. So that's that meet it bit. What else is she saying here? What points jumped out at you?
How can you be still when you've experienced how the foundation was laid and somebody's attacking it? How can you be still? You gotta say something.
Okay, you have to speak when you see that the Lord, people are destroying the foundations that the Lord has laid. And she's so fully convicted that this was the work of God, the foundational work, that she's duty bound to defend it. She can't keep quiet. I must obey the command to meet it. So what influence is it that would lead men at this stage of our history to work in an underhand, powerful way? We'll stop there. What influence is that? Alpha apostasy?
Mystery of iniquity?
Mystery of iniquity. Why the mystery of iniquity? Why do you use that? What is the mystery of iniquity?
The mixing of truth and error.
The mixing of truth and error. So if we're okay with that definition of mystery of iniquity, mixing of truth and error, how do you see the mixing of truth and error in this passage? Where do you see the mixing of truth and error?
Well, people are starting to attack the foundation.
If they're going to attack the foundation, that wouldn't be mystery of iniquity, that would just be outright slaughter. Let's just wreck the whole thing. But mystery of iniquity is truth and error, you said. So I'm saying, where do you see truth and error, Brother Philip?
It says a work that would remove some of the pillars of our faith.
Can
So
you see?
not all of them, but just leave some. And
Can you see that, Sister Tamina?
No, where are you at?
Same paragraph.
at the end of the paragraph. Do you want that?
Second to the last sentence.
Oh, okay.
They're only removing some of the pillars. If they remove them wholesale, they would say, this church isn't even God's church. We're going to become some new church or something. They're going to have to keep intact some of them so that they can maintain a semblance of truth to say, we actually believe this is God's church. It's just headed in the wrong direction. So I think it is this mystery of iniquity. It's a mixture of truth and error, and you can see it here. It's only some of it that's going to be taken or disturbed. The beginning of our work, again, I know people have struggled with this. I'm saying the beginning of the work is after the passing of time. This is October 22nd, 1844. That's where the beginning of this work is. In this context, this is not an attack that the foundations are not being laid in the right history, because essentially all of this is just repeated here. The 1843, 1850 chart, they say the same information. The beginning of our work, I'm saying that's 1844. And we know that, you know where it's got those two dots, two dashes, it says the foundation that was laid at the beginning of our work. Then it says by prayerful study of the word and by revelation. So I'm not saying that in this history we weren't studying, if we make an application, we were studying, but I'm saying it's revelation. Not revelation in the way that you might think. I'm not saying people had dreams and visions, but God would go and tell people, that's what this passage means. 9T, page 13, what it means is 9/11. It's the flashback that Brother Daniel, that's what God says. And we all accepted that. So either God wasn't leading us, then if he wasn't leading us then, why are we still here for? Which is what people have said. He wasn't leading us, that's why we have to leave the movement. What I find interesting, those people who are leaving the movement who say God wasn't leading us then, what's their argument? He wasn't leading us then, but he's doing what? Leading us now. And you think, well, what's he leading into? What's he leading you into? Where are you going? Where are you headed? So they find themselves in a really difficult position. They either have to sort of go back to church, which is not easy to do, or they have to create a new movement. And that becomes problematic in and of itself. So, because then you think, well, how did you get trapped into this movement in the first place? I mean, who duped you into this, coming into this place? Because you used to accept all of it. So they kind of buy into half of what we teach. The whole thing is just problematic for people who leave. If you don't accept it all, or you only accept a partial amount of that information.
If you're saying the foundation is faulty, how can you even build upon it?
Yeah.
Exactly, yes. Because that's what they're doing. They're building upon it in some shape or form. And that foundation they borrowed, if I can say it this way, from us. Don't mean us like me literally, because I wasn't probably part of all of that work, or from maybe you weren't, but us as a movement. How can you just sort of take all of this faulty stuff and try building upon it? Because and then White talks about that. They go in trying to do some repair job to make it all better, which is essentially what some of them are doing. Or they just never come back, and the only place you can go to is back into the church. Sister?
I think another key word that stood out for me was underhand. So there was this deceptive removing of things, and we experienced that here a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear that? I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I'm sorry. The key word that stood out for me was underhand.
First sentence.
And that in 2016 we experienced that here in the classroom. There were brethren here that were doing things in an underhand way, and mystery of iniquity.
So there are people who are working in an underhanded and powerful way to tear down the foundation of our faith. So it's not that they're not people who are not competent or don't have some ability, because they're doing it in a really powerful way. So it'd be easy to get sucked into this. It does remind me, when we speak about this issue, that each of us are required to understand who speaks for God and who doesn't. We spoke about this from the Desire of Ages passage that we read, and it really is contingent upon all of us to have a close relationship with Christ, because if you're his sheep, John chapter 10, you know his voice, and you know the voice of a stranger as well. And often we argue that we don't, but they do it in this powerful way that the elect could be deceived if it were possible. Sister Tamina?
I was going to ask if the last sentence, when it says they would remove some of the pillars, that we can say
Second from last one, yes.
second of the last one, sorry, that the pillars are waymarks. Because there's this other quote, I think it's in the same article, where she says that those waymarks will be replaced with theories, which will rather bring confusion than genuine light, when she talks about Satan is attacking the waymarks. So I was wondering if the pillars are if we could say those are the waymarks.
So the sentence says, upon this foundation we've been building for the last 50 years. So they've been building upon this foundation. We'll come to the pillars in a second. When she says we've been building upon this foundation for the past 50 years, what does that mean? You've got this foundation. What are you building for the last 50 years?
The house.
Building a house? A church, a temple? We tend to have that kind of imagery. What does this building of this house even look like? What are we conceptualizing this as people, like numbers are increasing, they're building, or is it doctrines, or what? What is being built? Someone say something?
I would say it's the doctrines.
Okay, so since that time period, what doctrines have they developed? Sorry?
I was thinking the Sabbath.
No, that was the foundation. She said we've been building on the foundations. Sabbath and the sanctuary, everything that's on that chart is the foundation. What are they building on top of that for the last 50 years?
Organization, health reform, righteousness by faith in 1888.
Can't you hear you?
Righteousness by faith, health message, and organization. That's what he said. I'm going to argue that the righteous by faith message is not being built upon. That was already there in the foundations. You can go back to Fitch's articles in 43, I think. No, Storr's articles, I think they are, in 44, that talk about the concept of perfection. I think Fitch does that as well. So they understand about righteousness by faith. Ellen White says that the third angel's message incorporates or includes the nature of man. All Wagner and Jones are doing is repeating. It's nothing new that they're bringing. That's why she says, when I heard his messages, that's what I've been saying for all of this. And she says, I can't remember what time frame she gives, but it's back to this time frame. So I've been speaking about this right from the very beginning, sorry? Yeah. So I'm saying that's not new. The Sabbath isn't new. The sanctuary isn't new. Sister Alyssa.
The church is growing in numbers. She has a parallel passage in Testimonies to Ministers, pages 24 to 26.
TM.
24 to 26, the passage that speaks about the numbers is TM 26.1.
Okay, so the numbers are increasing. Contextually, in first selected messages, what is she talking about? Look, we've got lots more people today than we did then. Is that the context of when she says we've been building?
At the very end, she says we're able to build humble houses of worship.
This is TM. Yeah, no, I'm asking contextually in first selected messages, the building that she's talking about here, we've been building upon these foundations. is she saying, look, we've got we've got much more numbers? Is that what the issue is? Because the men have been working underhanded in a powerful way. Are they saying, no, the numbers aren't right? Is this an argument about numbers?
Well, I don't think the number of people would be increasing if there wasn't something firm for them to be standing on.
I'm not arguing about the numbers are increasing. I'm asking in first the message is the building up that's on top of this foundation is contextually that talking about we've got a lot more churches now than we had then. Because that's not what even the argument's about, is it? The argument's about Kellogg. It's a doctrinal thing. She's saying they're tearing away the foundations. They're not tearing away like we've got 100 churches now and maybe we only had 2 then or something. Brother Graham.
I saw it a little bit differently. I saw from 1844 to 1850 they'd been given these divine revelations, and then after 1850 they're doing their Bible study, they're using methodology to add weight to the information that was already given through divine revelation. So that's the way that they're building upon the foundation.
Okay, so if we're saying they're giving weight to that, what new construction is happening? If you were to say something, you said, oh, this is a nice room, and I would say, let me give weight to that. I'd say, yep, it's got a really nice colour scheme to it. I've not given any new information, I've just given weight, kind of like I'm giving a second testimony, I'm agreeing with you. If that works, if you're going to say, because I agree with you with what you're saying, and if we're going to say that, then what new stuff is coming out if we're just giving weight to what we're just proving it? So I'm saying since 2014 we've got nothing new really in our movement. We're just explaining the old information more comprehensively. We're giving weight to it. Nothing really new. I'm not saying anything new about 9/11 or 1989. I'm just explaining it in a different way. I'm not saying anything new about the Sunday law. Just explaining it in a different way, in a more refined fashion, just giving weight to what we've believed. To me, it's like not much new. And someone else had their hands up. Our brother Daniel.
Can I say is a new development of the truth, just an unfolding of the old truth?
Okay, so if it's an unfolding of the old truth, which is I think exactly what Brother Graham's saying, a development of the old truth, there is no new truth. And she says so somewhere, we have no new message. If you've got no new message, you've got no new truth. There's nothing new.
Well, there is, the new is the new development.
What new information is that? What's new?
The development.
Yeah, but you've got to give me some real life thing. What was new after 1850?
Just like you said about early writings, she talks about, I think the latter rain is said, no, the Sunday law, I don't remember. And then you have the great controversy, and you say you can parallel those two chapters. They talk about the same thing, but in early writing she doesn't talk straight. That is, I don't remember. Do you remember?
Yeah, I understand the point you're making.
What was the subject?
It was about the Sunday law. They don't know about the Sunday law.
Yeah, they don't know about the Sunday law there, but then they talk. That's the Sunday law.
So it's a development of the truth,
Yeah.
but it's just a refinement of it.
Refinement, yeah.
It's nothing new. I think that's what Brother Graham's saying, and that's what you're saying. I don't want to force my point.
I'm not sure. I agree because, for example,
Agree with what?
With this concept that there is actually nothing new.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree, but I think, for example, you can look at all the Bible in this way. Because Ellen White, for example, she has a quote where she says, you know, if the patriarchs would have held themselves together with God, circumcision wouldn't be necessary. Then, if they would be faithful, the law at Sinai wouldn't be necessary. If they have kept the law, the book of Moses wouldn't be necessary. And then if they would be keeping the books of Moses, all the prophets wouldn't be necessary, and they'd be doing that and then we come to Jesus, and she says that the new wine, Jesus doctrine, is actually not new at all. It's actually a revelation of the past doctrine. Then Ellen White says what she says, it's actually not new at all. She's actually trying to explain the Bible because we didn't understand it. So it seems that every bit of revelation, it's kind of not new, but explaining the previous one because of our lack of understanding. So, but
let me take that thought. You just did one history, another history, and then Christ's history. Yeah? Development. And then we'll come to this history. How many histories is that?
Sorry?
How many histories is that? This history here that we're talking about.
How many?
Histories.
What, you just drawn 4 histories
No,
there?
in
or-
here, how many histories is that?
I don't understand the question.
We've got one history,
Yeah.
another one, and now we're going to the Millerite history, or Adventism. How many histories is that?
You could say 2 histories.
Is it?
The Millerites and us? I don't know.
Ellen White, I think almost exclusively, just has it as a continuum.
She talks about that.
Okay?
Progressive,
And,
yeah.
and in this story, we're not even in Millerite history, by the way, because we're post-1844.
The history.
No, we're post-1844.
Yeah.
So this is the history of Adventism.
Yeah.
So I'm saying this is one history. So if there's one history, in that history, there's not a development of truth of that history. There's not a development of truth of that history in the history itself. This history is a development of this one, is a development of this one. So this one has to be considered as a what? As a single entity. That's what I'm saying. You can't say this one and say the foundations and the building, that the building is a development of the foundations, because we don't do it in this one or this one and this one. This whole thing is a single entity.
I agree, yeah.
Now I
Okay.
get your point. So you have to say, yeah, I agree. The development in one reform line is based upon the developments in other reform line, not in the same reform line. Yes.
If you use that logic, then I'm arguing here. There is nothing new. When she says we've
Yeah.
been building upon this, I'll to make a point. So I thought you finished.
Yeah, I could see there's nothing. Yeah, I could see that there's nothing new, because it's everything they had was based upon the Millerite history, and there's no other reform line in that time period. If you were to say it's just one history.
That's
So-
why she says in 1904, whatever Kellogg's doing, he's not attacking what we did last year, or 3 years ago, or the 1888 message, or what happened in 1963. He's not attacking anything, because there is nothing to attack. The only thing that you can attack is the foundations, because after that, there is nothing there, because all of what's happened is just a building, or a refinement, or an explanation of what's already there.
So this it means that this building upon the foundation is a further explanation of the old truth. Okay, not a new light actually. Okay.
Brother Larry.
I'll try to apply what you've been teaching us to do, and that is to read it in context. And then I read the next 2 paragraphs, jumping ahead. She talks about past 50 years again in the last paragraph, and then she mentions the messages of heaven and ties them in directly with Revelation 14. So she's saying they directly have to do with the 3 angels' messages.
And the three angels' messages was, we haven't done it in this passage, but the foundations were before. It's this history here. If you go back to 1798, this is the history. There's nothing new after this. So when she says that we've been building upon this, I want to, if you're willing to see it this way, I want to say this building is not some increase of numbers, it's not some new light, it's establishment. It's establishing what we already knew, and that's all we've been doing for the last 50 years. And now someone is saying, this church's origins were all wrong. If you'd asked Kellogg, do you believe that this was a wrong movement? He would say, no, it's fine, no problem. Then she's going to say, well, why are you attacking some of the fundamental things that we dealt with? And he will say, no, this is a development or a refinement of truth. This is something new. I got new light on the nature of God. And she said, there is no new light on the nature of God. There is nothing new. Anything you want to know about God was already sorted out in this history. And just at a simple level, I know people are going to argue about that, because they're going to argue about the Godhead and all those issues, but they've got the Holy Flesh movement in this history. They've got spiritualism in this history. All of those things are being dealt with in that history, and all Kellogg is doing is just reinventing the wheel, giving it a new name, making it sound nice, which is the mystery of iniquity. So what I'm seeing in this passage here, this paragraph, is that the foundations that we have been building upon the foundation which we've built for the past 50 years is not the construction of a temple. It was all constructed way back there. It was all done. What's being spoken of here is the establishment or the confirmation. I don't know how Brother Graham and Brother Daniel said it. However they said it, I agreed with that. It's all sorted out in this history. There is nothing new past that. And that's part of the argument that I'm making, that the temple was built when the foundations are built. They're synonymous terms. It's not you build a temple on top of this thing. Brother Larry, Sister Tamina.
So, in the past you've drawn like word pictures. So, to try to explain in my mind what you just said is, the building has been built, the windows are there, but we can't see clearly. We're now cleaning the windows, then we can pierce in and then see these things more clearly. Is that?
Yeah.
Amen.
Sister Tamina?
I'm still wondering about the pillars, because she's saying now.
Okay, I haven't got to the pillars yet.
She's not saying foundation now. She's actually saying they're removing pillars, and the pillars are then put on the foundation. So when Kellogg comes and attacks, doesn't he attack the pillars rather than the foundation?
Brother Daniel?
That's the interesting thing, because she's gonna tell that the 2300 days is the central pillar of our faith, but the 2300 days is the foundation. So
the
they're the
pillars are the
same.
foundation?
You know? Huh?
So the pillars are foundation, just a different symbol?
That's what
of
it
it?
seems like, because if we know the 2300 days, they're a foundation. It's just calling central pillar, so we kind of agree what about he's saying, that this is nothing new, it's the same thing. That's what I think.
Brother Philip?
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing, because there's the first sentence and the second to the last are almost the same. In the first sentence says, work in a powerful way to tear down the foundation, and then we go back down. It says a work that would remove some of the pillars. So I think it's referring to the same work. So then the tearing down of the foundation, it's removing some of the pillars. So they have to be somehow connected. I don't know.
She doesn't mention in this passage about a platform. But if you were to go to early writings and go to the table of contents and see the chapter headings, you'll see after October 22nd, 1844, one of the chapter titles, I can't remember this, I think it's either the sanctuary and then the next one, or the other way around. It says a firm platform. Let me just make sure that it actually says that. Or am I missing it? Or does it say foundation?
And it's Spiritual Gifts Volume 1, we keep saying.
I keep saying 4, it's volume 1, isn't it? I don't know why I keep on saying that. Sorry.
From platform after.
Yeah, a firm platform, it says platform. Spiritual Gifts Volume 1, not 4. I'm saying What is if I said a platform, what is a platform? What does it conjure up in your mind? A stage. Sorry?
Something you can stand on.
Okay, it's something you can stand on. So here you are, a platform. What else?
Elevated foundation.
It's elevated, which is a stage. So you're higher than everything else. See, something you're standing on that's higher than everything else. And what did we discuss? That something that you're standing on that's higher than everything else. Yesterday, the day before.
Oh, the high path?
Sorry?
The high path?
The path. So, if we just change this to the wicked world below, and this is the path that you're walking on, it's just about imagery. It's all talking about the same thing. You can either be static because you're tarrying, aren't you? If you're tarrying, you're not moving. So you're not on a path, you're on this platform. If you're going to put a path, you're walking into heaven, you're on a procession. So I'm saying that this platform here is elevated off the earth, because that's what a platform is by definition. It's something that you stand upon. And I think these pillars that are being discussed here is synonymous with the foundations. And these pillars, how are they all connected together? Sorry?
By the platform.
Okay, she uses this phrase pegs. She says pins and pegs. And a pin is what? It's a small peg. So you've got pins and pegs. Brother Daniel?
The title says the firm foundation of our faith. Is that the title of the chapter, or you put the title?
It's the one that's straight out of the
in the paragraph we were reading, it says, upon this foundation we have been built for the past 50 years. Do you wonder that when I see the beginning of a work that would remove some of the pillars of our faith? So it seems like context. She's talking about foundation and pillars there as the same thing. She says pillars of our faith, but the title is firm foundations of our faith. That's what it seems like.
That's right.
Do the pillars hold up the platform?
I'm suggesting they do. If you go to real life, she talks about removing the pegs or pins, and if you were to remove that, the whole thing would collapse. This whole framework, if you like. And I'm saying this is a model that I think is being portrayed about the relationship between pillars and the foundation. And what everyone's doing is they're all standing on this firm foundation. This is what's they've been building upon, they've been all collecting or coming together on. And all you need to do is just remove a small peg or a small pin, and what begins to happen? The whole thing will crumble and collapse. That's why she says some of the pillars, you can't get away with removing some of them. And so the suggestion that Sister Tamina made about those pillars are waymarks, I wouldn't object to that. I think there is some logic to that.
She says waymarks in the last paragraph.
Okay, so we'll read that. In the line, is that 280.2?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just read that one then. We are God's commandment-keeping people. For the past 50 years, every phase of heresy has been brought to bear upon us to becloud our minds regarding the teaching of the Word, especially concerning the ministration of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary and the message of heaven for these last days. This would agree with what Brother Graham was saying, because it talks about the ministration of Christ, and that's what they were doing during the laying of the foundations. And all that they're doing now is defending their original premise, but now they're having to defend it through the Word. You can't defend it that Ellen White says. That's not going to work. You can't go to the world and say, Ellen White told us this, read the Ellen White book. You have to defend it from the Word. I think that's the point that he was making. as given by the angel of the 14th chapter of Revelation, messages of every order and kind have been urged upon Seventh-day Adventists to take the place of the truth which, point by point, has been sought out by prayerful study and testified to by the miracle working power of the Lord. But the waymarks which have made us what we are to be preserved, and they will be preserved as God signified through His Word and the testimony of His Spirit. He calls upon us as to hold firmly with the grip of faith to the fundamental principles that are based upon unquestionable authority. So as soon as you start using that context, the premier one that we're going to pick up in that history would be 1844, October 22nd, that waymark, and the waymarks that precede it in Millerite history. I'm not sure if we could argue that it would be 1850. We would today, looking back. I'm not sure if Ellen White would or would not see 1850 as a waymark, because we'd say 50 is Pentecost, this is the message now going to the world. We'd identify that as a hard waymark. She may or may not do. I've not seen any evidence that they think about 1850 in that way. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we want to give you praise and thanks for your goodness and your mercy towards us. Help us, Lord, to understand the work of foundation building, the work about the construction of the temple, and how these things come together. Lord, we know that this is a subject that's of vitally important to us, the understanding of how and when the temple comes to its completion. Lord, be with us, bless us and guide us. To this end we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.